My dear Corvo, what a sad hand fate has dealt you. The beloved Empress dead, and everyone thinks you're the killer. But we know what really happened, don't we?
In April 2012, a new IP was revealed that breathed new life into a small studio on the verge of bankruptcy. It was dark, it was gritty steampunk, and it was exactly what I was a fan of, because I was an edgy 15-year-old. With the red scene in the first trailer that remained in my mind for a long time, as I absolutely hate explicit close-ups, not that edgy after all. Now, more than 10 years and 1.5 sequels later, I finally played the game that I was so hyped for back then, but afterwards never touched. So, how does it hold up? Does it still match the universally positive image, or does it feel like the dust is finally setting on it? You are Corvo, the Empress's bodyguard, and she of course gets killed at the very start of the game.
Oh! Who could have seen this coming?
Her daughter Emily, heir to the throne, gets kidnapped. You get framed for the murder, and from now on you have to work in the shadows as an assassin to bring the people who wronged you to justice and find Emily, while a mysterious plague thins out the population of Dunwall, the city the game is set in. To achieve that goal, you are helped by the mysterious Outsider, a godlike entity granting Corvo magical powers which you can upgrade throughout the game. While the story doesn't have too many moments I would describe as shocking, the conspiracy is revealed right after the prologue, the exception comes with a final twist, which I only saw coming right before it happened. It's the world and the people in it that is the most interesting about the game. You encounter a few side characters, most of them with morally questionable motives, and you can decide if you want to help them or not, giving you gameplay benefits, but I'm gonna talk about that a bit later. The environmental storytelling is top-notch. You can really tell that the whole world is going sideways, the upper class just cares about power and intrigue, and people are just a means to an end. It is a sick world, and the plague just illustrates that all too well. What I, however, find disappointing about stories like these, and that is a very personal issue, is that you fight to restore the status quo. The guy responsible for the death of the Empress wants all the power for himself, and that should beg the question if it's a good idea to have one person at the top of the hierarchy. I know that it's more of a constitutional monarchy with people being elected to limit the ruling monarch's power, but striving for something better would give the game a more worthy goal. It doesn't have to work necessarily. But those are just my 3 cents concerning the story. The graphics are pretty dated, even for 2012. I remember being pretty disappointed when I saw them back then, because I was a sucker for good graphics. For comparison, this is the same year that Far Cry 3 came out. But the desaturated comic graphics really represent the world it takes place in. As I already mentioned, it's gritty, it's dark, and the fascist aesthetics in some parts of the map made me feel really uncomfortable. The cel shading look makes this bleakness even more alien. Cel shading in general seems to be a recurring theme when I think back to the late 2000s or early 2010s. Many shooters had this graphic effect to get across their artistic vision, and it was often used to make up for a lack of detail. I'm thinking about Borderlands or The Darkness 2. It's not bad per se, it's just something I noticed. The faces look very uncanny though, but that fits the overall body proportions. The game is also very short. I finished it in about 10 hours on medium difficulty, which was a nice change after the massive slog that was Assassin's Creed Shadows. It has extremely well designed sandbox levels, so you can approach the missions in whatever way you want. You can choose to go in guns and swords blazing, but you have to deal with the consequences. Or you choose a silent approach, without killing enemies and taking them out non-lethally or moving around them. That all influences your chaos level. If it's high, you get a darker ending. If it's low, you get the better ending. High chaos players have more tools and skills at their disposal, making it the easier route. If you want to get through the game without killing anyone, you can do that. But to take enemies down non-lethally, you gotta get up close or use sleep darts, and air takedowns, for example, are always killing your targets. Some quests also have an impact on your chaos level. As I mentioned before, you can choose to help out NPCs that in turn give you an alternative, mostly non-lethal way to take care of your target. That kind of freedom is something I'm missing in modern AAA games. Sure, it ultimately leads to the same or similar outcome, but I like to make my way through the levels while avoiding every single enemy. But there's something I would criticize. There are runes which allow you to get new skills, bone charms that you can use to boost your passives like running or swimming speed and the way rats react to you, and money, which you can use to upgrade your gear at base. In a pacifist run, you don't need nearly as much of all of this stuff as you would in a high chaos run. This led to me not bothering with most of it, as I had all I needed halfway through the game, and it was more important for me to not get spotted. But on the other hand, this just shows the game's freedom from a different angle. But my biggest criticism is that in the first 2 main missions, you have to go to basically the same area twice, and I was already worried that I'd always have to return there. Luckily that didn't happen, but the fact alone that they reused a level in such a short game is not something I like. And this is not a point of criticism, but something I personally found really funny. Corvo is his silent protagonist, which makes it feel like he's completely unfazed by everything that is happening. Sure, you do have dialogue options, but those don't do much because in my mind he's just standing there, T-posing while others are holding their monologues and letting everything just wash over him.
Why do we celebrate the anniversary of an assassination?
The story takes place a few years after the events of the first game. Emily is still the Empress, but about 15 years have passed between Dishonored 1 and 2. Corvo not only officially presents himself as her father now, but also as her closest advisor. Also, he talks now. And before we move on, can we talk about that real quick? I don't know, but this whole father thing has some implications for me. Were he and the Empress married? If not, does that make Emily a bastard? What is the in-law stance on premarital intercourse? Is she even his biological daughter? Later in the game it's revealed that she actually is. And has she been legitimized, or is that train of thought just a huge waste of my time? So many questions which aren't really answered, and let's be honest, don't even matter in the bigger picture. It's just something I probably thought about too much. But let's get into what is actually happening in this story. There is the so-called crown killer roaming around the Empire, killing Emily's political opponents to frame her as some kind of ruthless ruler who wants to get rid of anyone criticizing her. And this leads to the old Empress's sister, so Emily's aunt and Corvo's sister-in-law, I guess, to appear in Dunwall and claim the throne, as she states to be the rightful heir, and Emily does no longer fit the role of ruling empress. She succeeds, and you as the player can now choose who you want to play as, Corvo or Emily. I choose Emily, for she is the canonical protagonist in the second game. Whoever you choose, the other character gets turned into stone and you are now being persecuted for treason. The goal is now to go underground, find the real crown killer, remove anyone who is part of the conspiracy and set everything right again. If you feel like you're having a déjà vu, I can't blame you. The story is pretty similar to the one in the first game. I mean, you gotta play into the name of the franchise a bit, and you can only do that many stories about high-status characters that fall from grace and are indeed dishonored. This time, the most part does not play in Dunwall, but in Karnaca, which is still a part of the Empire, but located to the south of the previous setting. There is another plague going on, but this time it's bloodflies instead of rats that decimate the population. There has been a big leap in the 4 years in between Dishonored 1 and 2, graphics-wise. It still has a cel-shading look, but it's much more detailed, as well as the faces that now have at least some distinctive features. Textures have a higher resolution, the lighting is much more advanced, also thanks to the setting. We switched from fascist Germany-style optics to fascist Spain-style optics. How fun! The levels are much more crowded now, they are filled with civilians that make the world more lively, but at the same time those NPCs sometimes have pathfinding issues, so you encounter them walking into walls or sometimes nothing at all. There are bigger levels now, there is much more stuff to collect, which leads to a very crowded screen when equipping the heart. The levels are also more linear in some parts of the game. You don't have as much freedom to approach the areas as in Dishonored 1, as there's sometimes just one way to reach the target person. Fortunately, those are just the exception. Most of the time you can choose your own playstyle, which is the whole point of playing those games. Scouting the areas is more beneficial than in the first game. Sometimes it is even necessary to find the clue which makes you take out the target non-lethally, as in some instances you don't get any indications. There are more enemy types you gotta be aware of, not just regular soldiers, some dogs and the occasional assassin. The levels are not only more crowded with NPCs that can raise the alarm if you harass them for too long, but there are also more enemies that you gotta keep an eye on. That plays pretty well into the new skill system. You have many more powers at your disposal. I like the link ability the most because with that you can take out multiple threats at once. NPCs react more to the stuff that's happening, for example open doors or unusual stuff, like deactivated walls of light. But sadly that's only restricted to a few remarks, so they don't go and investigate further, they just ask who opened the door and leave it at that. The skills that I mentioned before are also more powerful now. You can use more advanced tactics than in the first game. The powers also depend on what character you chose at the beginning of the game. So Emily and Corvo have different options to approach the level by default. Some elements stay the same as in the first game, for example the bone charms and the runes. There is a crafting mechanic, because every modern game needs a crafting mechanic now, which allows you to create your own bone charms. But I never used it, and I think I didn't even unlock it. And there is a gameplay section close to the end of the game which brings about a welcome change and really tests your problem solving skills. I don't want to say any more about that, but it was pretty well made and you can probably tell as soon as you see it.
Every night for weeks, the same terrifying dream. A street fight, my arm dead and lying in the gutter, my eye gouged out by a Grand Guard sword.
Now, Dishonored Death of the Outsider is the game in the series I'm most conflicted about, because the premise was pretty promising when I first read it. That being said, I can't talk about the story of the game without spoiling a bit of Dishonored 2, so if you want to go into that like I did, maybe skip the story section. It is a standalone expansion, and you can tell because everything is toned down a bit. You only have a set of 3 fixed powers and you can't upgrade them. But you can use them very creatively to fit your playstyle. It's also very short, I was done in about 7 hours. You play as Billy Lurk, initially introduced to the player as Megan Foster in the second game, who wants to reconnect with her former mentor, the assassin DotO. He was the guy who killed the Empress way back at the beginning of the first game. They try to find a way to kill the outsiders, so as you can probably imagine, you will need to prepare a bit to kill a god. That's all I want to say about the story. Let's just say it has a very atmospheric ending. But let's talk about the levels, because I'm not a fan. There are basically 4 of them and some parts are recycled from the main game, as this also takes place in Karnaca.
Yo, I remember this place. It's the very first place we
Killed witches.
ever.
Which also means that there is basically no difference in graphics and art direction. Sure, there are some changes, but for a game that short, I wouldn't mind having all new original content. You also need to backtrack a lot. A significant part of the game is going back the way you came. This is a problem that has existed in the other games as well, but here it weighs the most for me, because all the levels are just crammed with enemies and dodging them twice gets pretty redundant pretty quickly. What is fun, however, are the new powers. Billy doesn't get the mark of the outsider, but a void arm instead, so they are slightly different but powerful all the same. There is displacement, an alternative to blink or far reach, where you put a copy of yourself where you want to teleport to. Dark vision is replaced by foresight, which lets you roam freely and mark enemies in the environment. You can also combine them both and set a displacement marker while using foresight, something I only realized at the very end of the game, after I actually read the button mapping on the corner of the screen. Whoops. The third and probably my favorite power is Semblance, which is similar to Corvo's power Possession and allows you to briefly take on the form of another human. There is no single mana bar like in the main game or Dishonored 1, instead you have 3 mana sections that refill completely after a brief period of time, so you don't need any potions. Money plays a bigger role, you can bribe people in some particular instances, and there are contracts you can fulfill. Mostly by kidnapping or taking out extra targets, which can lead to some funny interactions. All in all, it's The pure essence of Dishonored put into a very short experience and a different kind of story. Scouting the areas carefully is more important here than in any other game of the series, as the way forward is not always obvious, and it can give you huge advantages as every detail may be important later on. That's one of its biggest strengths, while also being one of its biggest weaknesses. It was frustrating at times when I was stuck in front of a gate, for example, and there was only one way to go forward, which was so well hidden that I ran up and down the entire level multiple times before finally finding that small crevice I needed to get through. I'm playing this game to have my own approach, so railroady sequences like these are out of place and not at all fun to play. That's why I didn't enjoy Death of the Outsider as much as the other games. The levels feel half-baked, especially towards the end, almost like they finally wanted to be done with it. I play those games to experiment in the sandbox, but exactly that part is missing in some instances. The story is different from the other games, a welcome change to play someone who is not highborn and wants nothing to do with the throne. But the characters in the whole series are just vassals. Nothing more, nothing less. Not very charismatic or anything, they are just there to bring the story forward. And that's okay. Those are not character-driven stories. If I had to choose a favorite of the three, it would probably be Dishonored 1. It just feels raw and fits the theme the most in my opinion. Now that I talked about the games, let's get back to the initial question. Is it still worth playing the Dishonored series in 2025 or soon 2026? Definitely. I don't play a whole lot of pure stealth games, and while you can choose to play offensively, here it is not at all advised, if you want to have a good ending. I like that the players are put into the levels and they can then choose how to solve them, something that many AAA games nowadays shy away from. And sometimes I even felt pretty stupid when I couldn't find the solution to a puzzle. It's also the first time I finished an Arcane game, and now I want to take a look at Prey and Deathloop to see if they are as strong as Dishonored. But there is something I realized about myself while playing. Something I've had my suspicions about, but now I have certainty, and I can imagine that some of you are struggling with the same issue. That's why I've put together a small educational video encouraging you to come forward if you're suffering from the same behavior. It all started when I played Gothic as a child. I wanted to open chests, and all I had to do was either press left or right. Anytime a lockpick broke, I wanted to reload the last save to do better and keep the combination in mind. Hi, I'm the Devos, and I'm a save scammer. Over the years, it just got worse and worse. In Baldur's Gate 3, I couldn't live with my rolls. Anytime I talked to someone or opened something, I made a quick save and quick loaded if I didn't get the result I wanted. It all found its peak now, with Dishonored. Every time I got spotted, I reloaded. Every time I killed someone, accidentally of course, I reloaded. I wasn't able to play a level without having the optimal outcome in mind. If you're watching this and feeling the same way, you're not alone. And together, we can beat that urge. Ah, damn. That was a bad take. Can we do that again?